Welcome to the SaaSOps Live virtual event, Solve number 23. Would you believe that we have not had a proper Solve like this since the 30th of April of this year? We have had many Solve tanks, 5 of them in fact, and we have actually had a few Solve unfiltered, which they're off the record. We don't record them, and these guys talk very, very candidly about the problems that they're having or the successes. But today we're going to be discussing offices being a thing again, or are they? So the Better Cloud, the SaaSOps show, discussed this topic a few weeks ago, and I thought it was such a good topic that we should discuss it here too. So my news feed has been constantly changing with the pros of office work, the pros of remote work, and then switching to the cons of remote work or the cons of office work. And I think the industry just can't really make up its mind. Which is hard, to be honest, because COVID rates are changing and the landscape's pretty flexible at the moment with that. And I just wanted to quickly show you guys, this is what I meant about what I'm seeing. Everybody can see that? Yeah, I'm sure you can. So I did a quick Google search, working from home. So some of the stories from today, some people are doing multiple jobs, which I find amazing. I have just enough time in my day to do my own job, let alone doing 2 jobs. That's interesting if that's a true story. I do believe that working from home can really improve your mental health and also your physical health. It's one of the big pros that I see. And then obviously the Washington Post talking about how remote work should be a permanent employee benefit. And then there's obviously, the tax man doesn't like us working from home and doesn't care that we're working somewhere cheaper. They still want their money. And then there's also the big story that we discussed on the Better IT Slack channel, which was about some companies proposing that they will actually pay you less if you are working remotely and not in their main campuses, which is a very, very interesting topic, which I think probably had one of the most replies in one of our Better IT Slack threads. And I did question whether we should sync that to the community. We can have some discussions about that. So offices are
you really
changing.
got some people going with that one, Colin.
Huh?
That less discussion there from
Yes,
the one about Google and
Wait, people care about their salaries? That's so weird.
So obviously offices are changing. Many are being rebuilt to be more collaborative, a more collaborative open meeting space with less static desks. You're not going into the office to sit at a big screen. You can do that at home. You're going there to collaborate and meet other people. And obviously some of that technology is changing and we have new tools to collaborate or even book a desk. So I wanted to ask you all as SaaSOps professionals, we even have somebody, a SaaSOps professional joining from a phone, which is brilliant. And I think that's probably Dominic if the Germany starts with a country code of 49. So what are we all seeing and what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that companies should start charging charging us individually for using the office. Okay, we should start docking people's salary for actually going to the office and then giving us that stipend back when we work from home. See, yeah, that's right. That's right. You know, you can rent a piece of office. Everyone becomes like a rental office.
I will say, like, as funny as that actually is, one thing that seriously piggybacks off of that is a lot of what people consider perks of their job are the things that were present in the office. So if your office had, catered meals or snacks or drinks or like even just the social interaction, stuff like that, a lot of those were things that people considered setting apart some jobs from others. I think my wife talks about working for Square here in St. Louis versus just going and working in Express Scripts or Enterprise or Purina, like a more traditional office environment. And that when they send everyone home, like, yeah, great, like we're taking care of people, that's important, but like they didn't really long term think about like how are we missing out on some of the benefits of an office. So in a way their pay is kind of getting docked for not going, whether the company decides to or not.
Yeah, if they're serving food in the office, for example, that's a whole section of your paycheck that suddenly is responsible back for you. And money aside, many of those that have kids really benefit from this, like, from the mental health of leaving home and having a different life outside of home. Those that have kids understand this. Yeah. Hi, welcome to the, yeah, I don't have kids myself, but I understand the concept quite well.
Well, the companies aren't even just paying for like those perks, like meals or whatever. Like, it literally cost money to have you sit at a desk. There's power going there. There's internet going there. And so I used to work for a BPO, business process outsourcing, where literally we would charge a client per seat that they used in our office space for the employees that we use to provide services for their company. It was literally a per seat. So if we could move someone to home, that per seat cost that we'd normally have to pay for in office stuff like a phone, computer, all that, we would then keep as a company. The employee wouldn't get it, unfortunately for them, but
Yeah,
there is that cost per having someone just physically in a building.
If you just
yeah,
look
none
at
of
like
that
what the
cost
WeWorks
goes back to
and-
the employee at all.
Exactly. If you look at like a WeWork or any of the other, solutions out there that, are like WeWork, like you have to pay because that stuff costs money, right? Like you're paying to be there because the internet and the square footage and the trendy furniture and the food and the coffee, like that all costs money. So if you look at it from okay, what would it cost us to go replicate what we have in an office in a shared workspace? Like, whoa, it gets really expensive really quick.
So the counter question for all of you here, just to slightly drag this conversation on here, is what if I don't have any numbers on this, but what if they're able to say that the collaborative efforts and the efficiency of group team employees actually is a lot better when they're all in office working together on projects, as opposed to trying to manipulate Zoom, video conferencing, work from home, isolation?
Oh, I was such a big.
That's a lie.
Working from home, like Dominic, sorry.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, on the phone, live from Germany, we have Dominic.
Hello. I don't believe that.
See, I disagree. Like, I was a big fan of like, we could do everything remote till I had an employee and we started building this stuff that we're working on. And like, we met for a couple days in person and we got way more work done in 72 hours than we had in 3 months. Right, like being able to like whiteboard and put stuff on. Now that being said, we don't need to sit next to each other.
You're not doing asynchronous right, Dan. You're not doing remote right, Dan.
Oh, damn! Shots fired.
It really depends on what you're doing, what your role is, and what you're working on. And I mean, there's a lot of factors there. But it's not true or false. It's conditional.
Well,
I would also
obviously
say
as
it'll be
well.
very.
There's something to be said for that, like the energy of, okay, we have 48 hours to do this, and like you're in person for the first time, and it's exciting and it's new, and like you do get a lot done. And I'm curious what the actual like long-term difference would be of like
Body
you being in the
language,
same
lunch
room as that
together.
person like all the time versus like, once you get used to working remotely together, what that's like long-term.
I will say two things that I think are kind of interesting on this. One, as far as the workspace goes, the major big corporations that have big offices, things like that, as much as they're pushing these articles, and there seems to be a lot of these articles that are slanted towards, you got to go back to office. It's just the thing to do. Everything's been hurt. And, the numbers said no, productivity went up. People work together really, really great. But they want to ignore that. I think it's going to actually take a while for them to be able to prove out numbers, like we had just started to hit on there, that it's going to take a while to prove out numbers around cost, because we went through it, and I think a whole bunch of other bigger corporations. You got big offices with large real estate costs. You're no longer housing that many people. You just want to get them back in there because you want to make it cost efficient and worthwhile to have all of that. But if you get rid of it and go to WeWork or something like that, a co-working space, you're actually saving a ton of money. It's not actually nearly as expensive, and oh my God, that racks up real quick. It actually really is not nearly as bad.
And you're lowering your risk profile, like, whoa, right? Like you don't have to take any of the risk of real estate and office management and all that other stuff.
Yeah, it's a huge, huge boon there. And then I think the next part that we are now just doing, because we are just returning into office voluntarily, and very, very recently, the official, we are not going to make a hard return to office happen later on in the year or when COVID dies down, that sort of thing, that we keep hoping for, that has now gone bye-bye. What we are going to do is strongly encourage, but not require, productive days, a couple of strongly productive days around Tuesday, Wednesday-ish or whatever. Try to book in-person meetings, go in hybrid, make those your in-face, because there can be benefit of, like you said, Blair, go in, spend some face time, bang this out, and then go back to working at home, because there's a balance. There is really those projects that you're going to do better if you cannot be bothered, be heads down, work at home in your comfortable environment, like the most extreme comfortable environment, pajama pants, no shirt, whatever the hell is your thing, you know, endless amounts of coffee. That's exactly what you like. Whatever is super comfortable for you, you're going to have it all. Nobody can restrict you. You're going to bang out everything, be super productive. And then the collaborative, you do a couple times a week or something like that, and specifically structure it. No, pants are not required. You could go without pants too, if that's what makes you comfortable.
All right, Randy, please make sure you stay seated for the rest of this.
What I'm picking up is that you're not.
I don't have the ability to blur anything out when I put it on
Yeah,
YouTube.
yeah, no, it says big sky, not big moon. I won't turn around.
Okay, so here's the deal. My brother is an introvert and a software developer who would kill you if you bring them back into any kind of office, because you would never get anything done because everyone would disrupt him. Conversely, I'm an extrovert and a salesperson mostly, and I would not get anything done because if I'm in an office, I would talk to everyone and disturb everyone. That would never work out well. I need my home office to get shit done.
Yeah.
I could totally see how engineers would have a harder time with the in-office because it's just the nose in, narrow in work. Who said it? I missed it. Who said it earlier that it's conditional? It's not about, it's true or false. It's true and false because it's conditional on the job you're doing. For example, all of us, you know, we're IT based, but I know the customer service teams benefit from having group pods together, because then they can ask questions from each other. Like, hey, this customer has this problem. I need some help with this type of thing. Doing that remotely over Zoom with a call on a SaaS phone, and
I mean, it's physically possible.
yeah,
you can physically do it. That doesn't make
People have been
great.
doing it for 18 months.
Yeah.
And I think some of us that are in the more strategic levels, right? Like the directors, managers, like that strategic level thinking, the group thinking, the throwing ideas against the wall. Like, again, you can do it virtually. We've all been doing it for over a year virtually, but it is way better as human beings to do that kind of interaction in person and reading the body language and going out to lunch and mulling over ideas and getting the creative juices flowing. Like, you just, at least yet, can't replicate that virtually completely. You can get close, but not quite. Like, look at all the leadership teams that are posting on LinkedIn over the last couple months of like, oh, I met with my group for the first, I've met some of these people for the first time ever. And we got way more shit done in a weekend than we did. Oh, I'm not allowed to, sorry, Roses. You know, but like that human side of it, I think because we're physical beings, will never really go away.
And I think that's evident. So we've been returned to the office for a while. I'm remote now, but they have been returned to the office. And the thing that I noticed when I visited before I moved across the country is I would spend twice as much time in someone's office fixing an IT thing because they want that social interaction. There's some that, do your job, get out, kind of like, you know, or developer, like, I don't want to talk to you, just fix my thing and leave. But everyone else is like, hey, another human other than my kids, I want to talk to you for longer. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Obviously, over the long term, that won't happen as much. But in the short term, when you do first return to the office, that's going to happen. You're seeing another human. You have that literally face-to-face interaction that is a time suck, unfortunately, but it's kind of needed. It did boost people to see one another in person. So
you want to stop interacting with kids and go into the office and work with adults that act like kids. But and actually, you know, we actually did a bunch of surveys around stuff for our workers and for our employees, and found that really kind of keying some of the encouraged returns are, you know, again, very individual, not a whole week, be there every single day. It's about making something out of the all team meeting that we used to just all do from home. So now that it's voluntary coming to office, okay, on team meeting day, we're going to kind of arrange all this stuff. We're going to have some extra special treats there. We're going to do all these things, whatever, and just kind of make the day a little more power packed and centric around that, and then leave the rest to everybody else's thing. You know, it's a big thing, and to have that choice and to have that control. And that's a huge part for why, me, I want to stay at home a lot, and instead of having to commute is a huge thing too.
I think the biggest takeaway for companies from this needs to be that you can't just have one central hub. I'm sorry, San Francisco, you can't be it. That doesn't work. And the fact that you can have talent all over the globe, all over the country to start, all over the globe, and eventually, without having to drag people to one of the most expensive cities in the country where they may not want to go. I tried it. I went for a couple of years, didn't like it, moved away as soon as I could. And the fact that companies are finally starting to get that, like, I'm still hireable, even though my ass isn't sitting in a chair in San Francisco. That's a big deal. And, if we see more of that out of the last, year and a half, 2 years, then that's a big win.
So to Randy, Blair, Caleb, great points. I actually am quite in agreement here. Should it affect your pay?
So actually, I wanted to jump.
Oh, you're going there.
before we go there, I wanted to jump in on your original provocation. So your original question was like, hey, should you as an individual pay to go into the office? And actually that brings to mind for me the idea of chargeback, right? So maybe not as an individual, but from your budget as a corporate citizen, or your budget as a function, maybe then there's a case to be made that you should say you should pay. And that's that for us as SaaSOps professionals, we start to think about chargeback models and what does that look like. And chargeback models have strengths and they have weaknesses. They have strengths because individual teams and functions can make the decisions that are right for them, but they have weaknesses in that you find it very difficult to optimize for the whole. And so for me, I think it's a really interesting question to ask is should we do a chargeback here? And the question is why or why not?
Yeah, I love work from home, and I feel like I will never want to, given the opportunity, never want to go back to an office. But that aside, just to play devil's advocate for companies and why this is so hard is there's other factors that all of us might not know individually, but collectively we can find out. But offices are expensive, especially if you're like a Google and you maintain campuses where you have your own kitchens and your own gyms, and they're all just sitting there empty, doing nothing for employees. So you're paying for all that and electricity that's ongoing for the routers that aren't being used. And then additionally, the real estate might be expensive if your hubs are in New York or San Francisco. So forcing employees or trying to get employees to use those resources are a big thing for a lot of companies. And then there's the side effects, right? For some vendors, some VoIP vendors, if you're trying to procure new phone numbers in several different countries internationally, some countries do require that you have that presence there with, along with, I can't remember the name of it, Dominic, you might know better, but some form of ID listed to the company or to the country's registrar that they can identify you as having a physical presence in that country. So now countries are having to pay for offices in other countries that are empty, just so they can have phone numbers for customers to call and have that kind of support. And that's just one example of this is a side effect of we need to have an office there. Even though our employees don't want to go to the office, we need them to use those resources, right?
Yeah, I've seen it happen.
Yeah, it's even worse than that. A lot of countries now, amongst all of this, are just now putting in the new legislation that requires you must have a physical address to use these VoIP numbers and have that. So even with all of this going on and realizing everybody can be remote, they're still proceeding through with the laws and actually getting them on the books. And then companies have to scramble to come up with records or actually have some sort of established physical presence there, separate from E911 purposes and things like that.
Yeah,
you have to be in Germany, for example. So in Germany, Google Voice, you have to upload documentation for Google Voice in Germany. Otherwise, you can't get a German phone number.
Yep.
The US just doesn't care, but
that's why all the good spam is come out of the US. It's so easy to get a 646 number. It's interesting you talk, Randy, about you're talking about the legislation and that. Andy Yates in the UK might know about this or might not. The UK are reinstigating a physical requirement to be on premise on your first day. So you have to do a physical employment check, an identity check where your employer has to physically see your passport as opposed to you holding it up on a webcam. So that's gonna, the rest of the time you could be remote in the UK, but you have to be in your company's primary office within a short period of time of starting as your verification check. Be curious to see. I know they do employment verification or identity verifications in the US. I don't know how that will be handled with more companies doing remote support. And it's curious how, was it Caleb? I think you were talking about San Francisco being one of those old dying big hubs of tech and industry. I think it's really good that a company like BetterCloud is going for remote work and is looking to create micro hubs around the US and congregating people around some of those large cities, and hiring an exec, a CTO in Denver, having your VP or SVP of marketing in Salt Lake City, etc., having your finance guy, I think, in San Francisco, and spread out it's also brilliant for disaster recovery, because then you have your leadership spread out across all 50 states as opposed to all being in that big fancy San Francisco office if there was to be a disaster there or something and the whole of your leadership is struggling.
Now, there is a caveat to that because of how jank the US tax system is, that remote doesn't necessarily mean remote in all locations, as I've encountered a number of times where if I lived like 3 miles east on the other side of the Mississippi, there are, hundreds of jobs that I would be eligible for that I can't because I live on the Missouri side.
Yeah, I promise I'm going to let
make it
Benji
make
go.
sense,
Yeah, I promise I'm going to let Benji go immediately after this, but very specifically to the tax thing here. That has actually gone in line with like BetterCloud's strategy of the micro hubs. Our company has kind of gone towards that in a semi-natural, but also employee first mentality, because they're trying to be very careful about the tax laws and everything like that. So there are, like, for example, employees that used to be very New York centric, literally in Manhattan. You would have to pay the Manhattan tax, the state tax, and the federal tax for all of your income. But maybe you didn't live there anymore, but that was the last they had you as your location. They needed to get on top of that to stop getting you all taxed for all of that. So, you could have moved to a tax-free state for, moved up to New Hampshire and not have that going on. But that it became an employee first kind of thing, and now it's forming these little micro hubs.
Yeah, that requires the employer to be incorporated in that state to be able to pay you directly through that state. Unless I would hope that there'd be more payroll companies, or you get, I don't know how it would actually work, but you get sort of subcontracted by your company to another company, and they're the ones that pay you because they've got the infrastructure. They're incorporated in every single state. It's very hard for a small company to be incorporated in every single state, because you've got to file taxes every month in that state or some stupid system like that, and it becomes impossible. But let's go right up into the top left-hand corner for me, other corners for other people. You might be anywhere on this screen.
Blair, Benji.
Hey, thank you for letting me in. I'm using noise cancellation. How's it sound?
You sound fine, yeah.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Okay, so I'm going to try to keep all of this super quick. First, lunch is not free, right? When you get free lunch at work, that's included. That's part of your total compensation. And that's something that the business does in order to incentivize you to show up at their building. So you shouldn't be charged for that because you are being manipulated with your consent. But that's the business investing in an incentive to get you to do something you wouldn't do naturally, right? So that being said, I work for a remote first company. We do hardware R&D, which is as hard as it sounds. So we've got like 5 people that actually have to be present in the office, and that's about the capacity. And then we've got another 35. I have no idea where they are. Sometimes they're in France, sometimes they're in Spain. You know where that really sucks? Getting a new hire their laptop.
Yeah.
right? So without resorting to fulfillment phenomena, what that's forcing me to do, God damn it, is get my act together and be a proper Mac admin.
Do you ever
So
get
there-
addresses like ship my laptop to this Starbucks on the corner of this and this?
Logistics is one of our main problems, our main challenges in the last 18 months. We are less of an IT department, more of a logistics department. The IT we had solved. Now we're struggling with logistics.
So the thing that's actually made us a snowflake, because tech debt, we have to use Catalina. And if you buy a Mac today, you have to do quite the two-step to get it back to Catalina. I am told that Docker will solve everything as long as we stay on Intel. But then there's this other question. People, like having done an inventory, people's at-home setups, even with the $1,000 stipend we offer, people have a much more swank, like awesome home IT setup than we would offer. And we didn't have to pay for it.
This is true. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with trying to backtrack a new laptop back to Catalina, you have to put it in the freezer for like an hour. And then I believe you have to, I think you actually have to draw a pentagram on the ground.
You put it in rice, I thought.
And salt. Yeah.
A full-blown
It starts with a
seance.
live rooster.
Isn't there a special adapter that you need to buy for $130 to get it to work?
6 of them.
Yeah, it's Microsoft branded.
That's why I only ship Chromebooks.
Ironically, it's driving our dev team to get their act together and hurry up and take care of the tech debt. So, I don't know, man. Costs me an extra week every time I have to roll one.
Yeah,
Maybe you could bump.
I'm not giving up my snow leopard.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Mojave is as good as it ever got, but in terms of like wanting to be at the office, not wanting to be at the office, we all have various kinds of vert to us. And, you know, introvert, extrovert, ambivert, fucking Mondays don't feel like it. But Wednesday is great. One of the things that we have to be intentional about is, why are we all here? Do we all show up and be silent? Then we shouldn't show up. But on the days when you're making an important, existential decision, you better be there so you can see the look on everybody's face and let everybody be silent and uncomfortable and not just turn their camera off.
Do you recommend eating first before making those decisions? I'm not sure if doing that on empty stomach is actually a good idea.
I like what you said though about part of your compensation, because it's so true, right? Like I have definitely chosen jobs because of some of the perks, right? And it's not pitched to you as compensation, but when you calculate it out, it's like, oh shit, if I get
It's
lunch,
saving a
free
huge amount of
meals,
time.
yeah,
Like, you don't have to go out of the
Yes.
office, get distracted, walk
I
around
love the
park.
companies that include all their perks in their calculation for how much you're making. They're like, your salary is this, your benefits are, this, that, and the other. You're like, here's this out in a line item the way we've calculated it. You're actually making $350,000 or some stupid crazy high number because of all the perks, right? Like, because
That's the cost benefit analysis for them is that they got you in office, they give you lunch, you're unlikely to sit there and eat it for an hour that you're supposed to get. You're going to eat it in 20 minutes and just go right back to work. And there's no time wasted for you to go out or go microwave anything. It's just there. So they actually get
look
an
at
extra
this
45
as
minutes of your time.
this is a transaction.
I have a
Like
question.
I am giving you my time and my skills, and you are exchanging that for what I consider valuable, whether that's working from home, whether that's a bitchin' salary, whether that's all the cool perks, like whatever it is. Like this is the transaction that we are making, and everything needs to be on the table, and you need to understand you get X for Y. And that's, if I change Y, I'm gonna go somewhere else and get that new Y, right?
Right. And when the business has a business need, then the business expresses that need to the limits of, what's not going to kill you potentially. But like, if it means that everybody flies into HQ once a month and you get to work from home the rest of the time, well, rack up some frequent flyer miles. Is that what they're called?
Yeah, it's cheaper.
I've seen both ways though, where the company like asks you, requires you, I'm gonna put bunny ears on that, requires you to come to the office every now and then, but I've seen different options where they make you pay for it yourself versus being able to expense it. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's an anti-pattern. Although, just a really quick anecdote, I worked for that one company back in 2004, and we grew from 2,000 to 30,000. And I was the guy that handled ticket exceptions, passed stuff from help desk to Corp SRE. And the biggest thing that helped us in general was expanding from Mountain View in Dublin to 14 sites in 8 time zones. I was able to get on call down to 2 hours during business hours every week. And yet we don't think of that as a model, like something to strive for. It's just some VP wanted to move there. So that's where the office went. But it had a real impact on our uptime. I feel like we should be actively aggressive recruiting not just remote, but temporarily distant.
We've seen
For
a lot
sure,
of the outlash about companies now posting job postings and including salary expectations within those job postings. I'm kind of wondering if like a very clear company outlook on perks also should be kind of included there, since we're kind of talking about how it all gets included here. Because like what Blair was making the connection with what Benji was saying too, about it's part of your compensation. Well, if we're just putting down salary requirements, maybe we're missing out on all the perks that come with it, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I was literally just in an interview yesterday, so this is fresh in my mind, the statement like, you're interviewing us as much as we're interviewing you. And like, they have a certain expectation of what information you're going to provide, of your qualifications and whatnot for the job. It should be just as much expected that the company is putting forth their qualifications to be your employer. You know, what the salary expectations are, what the benefits, what the perks, stuff like that. Like, why should I come work for you? Like, yes, the answer is I need a job, but like, why specifically you?
If they don't post the salary requirements in the job rec or in the first conversation with the recruiter, unless it's some company that I'm just dying to work for, some really crazy cool project, I'm done. Like we're done here. Like, okay, like you clearly are not serious about this being a two-way interview. I'll go. There's plenty of other gigs out there right now.
It does seem to be slowly changing. I'm seeing more and more companies who are sort of slightly changing the conversation a little bit about going back to the office and remote work into work in general, with more companies certainly on LinkedIn posting the actual salary range, which is better. I think there's a lot of execs and CEOs calling that practice out, and obviously those other companies that want to get the best talent are being open with that. One thing I wanted to ask about is, as we come up to the last sort of 14 minutes of our time here together, was changes in offices. Obviously, we've talked about, should every office be a WeWork or a Regus and not a physical, liability, a real estate leasing liability for the company, and they just rent, space as and when they need it, whether it's monthly, quarterly, annually for a big meeting. But what are people doing in their offices? The company that I work for is renovating a portion of all of their floors in one of our large buildings. On one side of the building for about 10 floors, they're taking out all of the desks and they're putting in collaborative areas where there'll be couches, high top tables, big screens that you can move around. Apparently they're getting some VC video conferencing system that you can move around. There'll be sort of sound dampening panels that you can move around, so you can
collaborative areas.
You can jump into a meeting room. You can have your conference, and then everybody can jump out into a collaborative space and start putting post-it notes over everything. And there's a lot of technology to go with that. What are people?
Well, but what's the air exchange rate?
Pardon?
Air quality control is what he's bringing up.
Right.
Yeah.
It sounds lovely, but I'm not sitting next to anybody on a couch. I'm not even sure I want to think about most couches I've ever sat.
Maybe it's a very
But-
big couch and 6 feet apart. It's going to be. I've only seen the graphical representation of what it's supposed to look like.
The
It's
run
pretty
rate now
busy
said-
to me.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of interior design, corporate level interior design companies that have gotten on top of this. The one that we worked with it was already getting right on top of it. So when we got to the point where we were ready to return to office, they were able to work with us with rearranging what we had. And, our big city offices, our San Francisco one happens to be small enough. Our New York one was too big. We closed it down. We're now, we work there. Our Missoula, Montana one is remote enough in its own kind of natural location that even if it is big, it's essentially cheap enough to keep the space. But that one is where we did go and redesign everything. So from a previous state where we just had lost more and more soft seating to put in more desks as we were hiring, we've now gone the reverse, put in more collaborative space and soft seating and pulled out some of those desks and spread things out a bit more for safety's sake. One extra benefit that kind of plays to what Benji has mentioned, we happen to be in LEED certified buildings. The air exchange and the air filtration system in those buildings is of a set standard that does resolve that. So you don't have to go above and beyond to put in, what am I thinking here? Ultraviolet filtration, systems in the filters and up your filters and all that sort of stuff. The LEED system is already doing that.
I mean, what's your absenteeism been like for the last 18 months? It's been mostly voluntary.
Our return to office is voluntary of that. And New York's, I think, a little surprising, but also kind of almost expected based on the fact that nobody has space at home, all the tiny little apartments. There have been a lot of attendance back to the office in New York. Montana, not so much, might change in the winter, who knows? That might also just be like nobody wants to commute in the winter, who knows on that? But the attendance is much smaller here, and San Francisco is actually very small too.
I think what's interesting about all of the people on this call here and in this community that I know of, we all have the luxury of a decent working space at home, I believe. I'm pretty sure Blair has a suite set up. I know Caleb does. I have a suite set up. I'm guessing Brian does. Chris always is at that incredibly bland window.
Who was pulling the Harry Potter and working under the stairs? There we go, Caleb. Okay. Yeah. I knew somebody was living under the stairs.
Yeah, you have to specify which Caleb. Caleb Coy has a great setup. I literally have an office under the stairs.
Well, to your point, I feel like that's just caused by the never-ending circle of having to go to an office that we've broken out of in recent years, because most tech jobs are in these hubs, and a lot of jobs in general are in these hubs, and so we're forced to live in an area that we can commute to these hubs, and the areas that we do live in to be able to commute to these hubs are just very small, those tiny apartments that we can barely afford with the money that we're making just from that job. And because of work from home and that ability to do that, we can't branch out and move to places where we can afford to have spare space, to have offices, so we can still do our work. So it's just, yeah.
This is where we mention our sponsor, the state of Michigan. Come move to Michigan. We have all the land that you could ever want. I always feel like we should have sponsors at the show. So.
Hey, your dollars go real far in Northern Michigan. Can confirm.
I'm curious, who here actually sets salary range?
No, it's way above my pay scale.
Who here is a manager?
I see a split between HR trying to get their next promotion by coming up with something brilliant, and HR waving their hands and just saying this is a temporary condition. Is that pretty much all?
I'm
What I've
working
seen-
in lockstep with HR on developing like a leveling system of like individual contributors and managers and like what level are you at? What do you need to do to get to the next one, right? Like very people focused on the whole thing. But that's in lockstep with, okay, how do we track that from a systemic and data perspective and verify that and then replicate that in, our actual people. Right. So
industry standards of those bandings is very, very difficult to
we
get.
aim for 30% above industry. So like, and that's regardless of where you live, right? So, okay, great. How do you calculate industry? How do you calculate tenure? How do you like whatever? We really like the Buffer approach, or I think it's GitLab that's really, really public. Like Buffer has all their salaries posted on their website, like buffer.com/salaries, and you just run down the list, right? Like that level of transparency where they say, okay, this is how we calculate it. This is what you're going to get. This is why you make this, that, or the other. I think is freaking rad. Like as an employee, I freaking share my salary with people all the time, right? I want to know what all my coworkers are making, just like I want them to know, right? Like at a previous employer, we found out like, oh shoot, dude, you are making 40% less than me, but I would say you're a better employee than I am, right? Or you're more skilled than I am or whatever. Like that's not okay, right? Like that conversation, doing that via data, all about it.
Yeah.
Markets that depend on collusion and secrecy.
The
That's not
motion, the motion I feel is hugely beneficial of eliminating some of those divides that we haven't exactly mentioned yet in this call, but there's divides of where you live, divides of how you grew up, divides of who you are, divides of all these different things, and a little bit of transparency on how much is everybody's getting paid, which is classically a secret, understandably, if you don't want to brag. But I commend it. I commend it for those that actually bring this out and be like, hey, we're all working, doing the same job. If we have a little bit of transparency, we can all make sure we're getting paid fairly as well by this company.
But I also think in pay, you have to bring up the fact that cost of living is different elsewhere. But when I'm looking for a job, I do look at that. I realize, okay, in San Francisco, I could make a lot more money, right? But then the cost of living is so high that I really don't make more money. It's literally a lateral move.
I think in the remote first world, we've got to separate cost of living from salary. Like it is, I am paying for a job. I don't give it, and especially if I don't give a shit where you live, like I am paying for services. The rest of it is up to you. And part of the whole, I provide X and you provide Y scenario, right? Because as a person who's making Silicon Valley money and not living anywhere near Silicon Valley, I really appreciate that, right? If all of a sudden that switches, people like me get screwed, but the job doesn't change. What we're providing doesn't change. The skills and requirements, like none of that changed. So why should the pay change?
I've seen companies get it wrong.
My job changed a lot.
Benji, one more time.
I'd like more money now. My job changed to a completely different gig as a result of the pandemic. And when I have a review this week, that's going to be a topic. Like, yeah, I'm not commuting 2 hours every other week because I was already there, but I am going physically out to ship laptops. Like, suddenly I have to carry stuff. Jeez.
I had one friend of mine who lives in Tahoe area. I know, Colin, we're almost out of time here, aren't we? But he was talking about the difference in pay from like the San Francisco area, Blair, you were mentioning, and then like Tahoe area or Truckee area. And he's like, things are just expensive for me over here as it is in San Francisco. Why am I suddenly like 10% less or something, whatever the ratio was? And he's like, why are they choosing this for me?
Yeah, I think there does need to be some sort of national study, or it's difficult in the US. It's easier in some of the other countries where they're more centralized and agreeable amongst themselves. In the US, it's 50 independent countries almost together under one. Cost of living, there are some very, very fixed costs in the US and everywhere. Your Disney Plus, your Netflix isn't cheaper if you live in Kansas or whether you live in New York City. That's why I have problems with some of these fixed costs. Yes, you do have variations in tax, but then tax, gas, car insurance, and all of that. Whoever can work out an amazing calculator would get a lot of hits and probably a lot of ad revenue on that. But this discussion in the last 45-ish minutes has been great. We've decided that remote work is for everybody. Collaborative spaces in the office are for everybody.
Michigan is for everybody.
Pardon?
Michigan is for everybody.
Michigan is for everybody. There is no There is no black and white answer. Everything is gray. Offices are the right choice for the right people at the right time. Remote is the right choice for the right people at the right time. And I think it's up. Companies have to be, which is terrible for their policies and their HR department and trying to keep people equal. They need to be incredibly flexible. And that's why we're probably seeing this flip-flopping in the news, which causing some uncertainty, I guess, in ourselves, where we're seeing all of these different stories. And I do realize that probably a lot of them are clickbait, because I certainly did click on them. And, and some of these companies are having some PR struggles and employee strikes in some places. I know in the UK, Pret a Manger went on strike because I think they were permanently reducing people's salaries after COVID, which is terrible. But yeah, this discussion I know will continue on the Better IT Slack channel and the SaaSOps community. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back here in a couple of weeks talking to another SaaSOps vendor as we put on our Solve Tank t-shirts. No, you're not getting t-shirts, people. And we will grill them and have a look at their platform and give you our feedback. So great to see everybody. Thank you for coming. Stay around for the after party.